collect all bolts.
The rest of Epic Megagames' 1993 lineup came from their partnership with a development company based in Poland called Xland, who had also published the Polish translation of Epic Pinball. And due to my being totally unfamiliar with the 32-letter Polish alphabet and its dense forest of accents and strokes, I'm going to start off with a blanket apology for absolutely murdering the names of everyone I mention in this video. Xland released 2 games through Epic in 1993 and one in 1994, and they were all later bundled together under the name of the Epic Puzzle Pack. The first of these games was Robbo, which has its roots on the 8-bit Atari systems. It was designed in 1989 by the secondary school leaver Janusz Peltz, who had just co-founded a software company roughly called Laboratorium Komputerowe Avalon, and who later went by the thankfully simpler online name Chaos. The original version ran on the XL series of Atari home computers of the time, and was extremely popular in its home country. Unfortunately, Poland had no laws around software piracy at the time, so the game's popularity didn't translate into vast financial success for LK Avalon. A couple of years later, Janusz became part of a new company called Xland, under which he and this person here completed a DOS version of the game and released it in 1993. When the deal with Epic came along, an English translation was also prepared for them to distribute in the United States under the title Adventures of Robbo. Robbo is a fairly simple grid-based puzzle game whose mechanics could almost have been implemented directly in ZZT. It plays like it's somewhere between Boulder Dash and Sokoban, with the objective in each level being to collect enough bolts to let you leave and then get to the exit. Along the way, you'll be dealing with the usual puzzle game furniture: crates that you have to push out of your way, teleporters, and enemies that roam the map. If you find a battery, you can shoot back either to get rid of the enemies or to knock down walls or activate bombs that clear the 9 tiles around them of anything that isn't a solid wall. The game is mostly silent, apart from some nice title screen music, which I've dubbed over the rest of the game here, but sound effects are provided with the unusual sound design of just saying things that are happening out loud. The game is divided into groups of 4 levels called systems, and every time you complete a system you get a password that allows you to restore your progress at the start of the next one. There are 15 of these systems, totaling 60 levels, which should be enough to keep players going for a very long time, and it's also a very challenging game, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes not. The levels are 1 screen wide but 3 screens high, and the screen never scrolls up or down far enough for you to really see what you're doing. You only get a couple of tiles buffer in front of you, which makes it very easy to run into enemies hiding just off the visible window. It's also annoying that enemies will cause Robbo to lose a life just by casually passing by the square next to him instead of having to run into him, and the lasers and cannons around the level operate with random firing intervals instead of constant ones, so you're chancing your luck every time you have to dodge past them unless you can find a way to block them off. These annoyances aside, the game was a phenomenon in Poland, and multiple other versions of it were made besides this DOS one, including versions for the aging Commodore 64 and the Atari ST. And much later, the game was ported to iOS under the name iRobbo. Avalon also released a remake of the game in the year 2000 called Robbo Millennium, with an enormous 130 levels featuring the pre-rendered semi-top-down 3D-ish graphics that were emblematic of the time. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it still available anywhere, and no English version seems to have been released. On top of that, a fan-made remake of the game is available on SourceForge under the name GNU Robbo. This version removes some of the game's more old-fashioned stumbling blocks like the lives limit, and offers an astounding 1,113 levels, along with the revival of one of Epic's mainstays, a built-in editor. A construction kit had existed for the first Atari version of Robbo as well, but it had never been ported to the PC along with the rest of the game. With a fan following this dedicated, it's safe to say that this humble puzzle game will live on for quite some time yet. The second game in the Epic Puzzle Pack is Electro Man, which the attentive viewer will quickly notice is not a puzzle game. Originally, this was an Xland release from 1992 called Electro Body, and it's an exploratory platform game with a distinct metallic futuristic style. The idea had been proposed by the head of Xland, Marek Kubowicz, and the development work was done in 9 months by the same team as the DOS version of Robbo. In 1993, Epic Megagames saw the game's potential and arranged to re-release it as shareware in the rest of the world outside Eastern Europe. Under the new and frankly slightly inferior name Electro Man, the game got a fresh coat of paint and a frame rate upgrade. You don't notice the sluggishness of the original version on its own, but when you play them back to back you really notice how much more satisfying the Epic version is. In Electro Man or Body, you play as a character mostly made out of steel and ham, whose name I'm going to attempt to pronounce as Jacek. He bears more than a passing resemblance to Robocop, which according to the developers wasn't part of the original plan, but when the graphics artist found he couldn't do human faces, he decided to work around the problem by ramming this bucket onto his head instead. The game itself doesn't contain anything in the way of storyline, but according to the README, Jacek is rampaging through a space base to clear it of alien invaders. In order to make your way through the complex, you have to collect the 3 cartridges that are scattered around each area of the base, and then find the large teleportation pad to transport you to the next zone. Until I played this game again for making the video, I was going to say that it was an early example of a game with a completely continuous world, not separated into levels. However, I was later to realise that I had this impression because I had never in my life actually completed the first level of Electro Man. There are indeed separate missions, but they're all absolutely massive. The first level alone spans over 70 screens with nooks and crannies to explore in all directions. The static screens give the game a bit of a Prince of Persia feel, with the player having to work out the layout of the levels by exploring and discovering routes to reach new areas. Just like in Robbo, firepower is represented by batteries that have been left lying around. You begin with no ammunition whatsoever, but by finding these pickups, you'll be able to upgrade your gun through gradually increasing levels of projectile speed, vertical coverage, and ability to slice right through enemies. Some of the background scenery is satisfyingly destructible, though you have to be careful not to let an innocuous monitor or fuse box block your carefully timed shots, and it's important not to fire recklessly as you can run out of ammunition and be downgraded to the level below your current one. The controls are very heavy by design. Once you've started a jump, you're dedicated to it and you can't influence your direction until you're back on the ground. Combining this with the fact that Jacek has no health bar and will violently explode at the slightest touch of an enemy, you really have to concentrate to keep yourself alive. When you discover one of the precious few restart points, touching it will rob you of all your ammunition. This sounds annoying, but as you'd restart with no firepower anyway, it just means that you can't enter a new area with a better gun level than you were meant to have. It's also possible to avoid some restart points by jumping over them, but I never found a place where it was preferable to do this. The distance you have to cover between them is already a bit on the long side, and the amount of retreading you have to do is very large if you die having skipped even one of them. Sound in the game is fairly sparse. As far as music goes, you'll only hear it on the title screen and the between-level summary screens. The sound effects are mostly what you'd expect, being a collection of zaps, bangs and kerblams, but there are a couple of notable outliers. The first of these is the restart points, which in the original game loudly proclaimed "Jesus is here" when you touch them. In the Epic re-release, the sample is still present, but it's been reversed so as to be unintelligible. The other voice sample in the game is something that I've been unable to pin down.
We have to be careful. This is an emergency area.
That sample plays every time you start a level or have to restart from a save point, and with the refined accent on it, I was sure that it must have been lifted from a film with some famous British actor. I was actually surprised that, unlike the previous sample, it had been left in the game intact. But every search I made for the curious phrase, "We have to be careful, this is an emergency area," just led to pages talking about Electro Body, so I'm none the wiser as to where it came from. I even reached out to the developer, Maciej Miosik, to ask him, and he said he couldn't remember exactly, but that he probably got the sample from a song by the Belgian electronic music group Front 242. The development team seems to have been fans of them, as the name was also used as a cheat code in Adventures of Robbo, so that seems quite a likely source, even if it doesn't solve the mystery of where they got it from in turn. Electro Man is one of my favourite games so far in the Epic back catalogue. It's quite basic in terms of how much you can do in it, and the amount of repetition when you die can get frustrating, but something intangible about it makes the exploration feel very satisfying. At this stage, Xland's games were being made with very scant resources. Before the online Epic release, the developers had to make the game boxes by hand and shrink wrap them with the aid of a sandwich toaster. But their efforts paid off, as like Robbo before it, Electro Man was lauded as a significantly competitive Polish game product, and today is regarded as one of the most important games to kick off the Polish game development scene. And so, having finally covered all 11.5 titles that Epic released during the year 1993, the last game included in the Epic Puzzle Pack was 1994's Heartlight. Once again, this is a grid-based puzzle game by the same Polish team, and it was originally released on the Atari in 1990. It's an obvious take on Boulder Dash, and it has the nice presentation that is characteristic of Xland's games, with shiny VGA graphics and some great background music. Heartlight stars a dwarf called Percival, who in the tradition of this style of game, you have to guide through a series of puzzle rooms collecting all the hearts before escaping to the exit. You're free to move in any direction, but most of the other elements on the game board are affected by gravity. The game has no enemies at all, and instead the basis of the game's puzzles is created by you having to deal with how the objects behave when they're disturbed. Like Jacek, Percival is extremely fragile as a main character, and anything dropping on his head will cause him to explode, including the hearts that he's meant to be collecting. The round green marble-like boulders are the game's most common feature. They'll drop downwards when grass underneath them is removed, and it's important to remember that they will roll off to the left or right if they're perched on a heart or other boulder, but not if they're resting on grass or a wall. Balloons are the opposite of boulders and will travel up the screen, lifting the weight of up to one other object if they have the opportunity to. Happily, they're also unable to squash you. The blue grenades are the other thing that you'll see a ton of in the game, and they're all improbably volatile. Falling any distance at all will cause them to detonate and take out whatever's in the 4 tiles immediately around them. This can include walls, hearts, and even the level exit, so there's definitely a right way and a wrong way to use them. Many levels involve you having to work out how to safely transport a grenade to where it needs to go. Grass is the only thing that a grenade can land on without causing a cataclysmic explosion, so as you move around a level you have to be very aware of where you're treading so that you don't remove an important soft landing. If you make a mistake, which you will very frequently, the level can be restarted instantly by hitting escape and there's no life limit to worry about. Heartlight gets very difficult very quickly. Despite having just a few different puzzle objects to work with, it requires the player to have a very good understanding of how all these elements interact with each other, as well as a meticulous sense of forward planning. Even as early as the 4th level, you have to plan a very careful route that allows you to take the one-way tunnel to the other side of the board, safely transport the grenade down to the bottom of the screen, destroy the wall and then reach the exit without blocking yourself off or destroying grass so that the grenade can't get to where you need it. Personally, I had to admit defeat much later on because of this level, which seems to be asking you to cause an explosion against the rules of gravity by somehow piling grenades up together. No save feature is provided, which feels like a bit of an oversight considering the game contains a straight run of 70 levels, but there is an undocumented feature that allows you to skip through puzzles by holding down the spacebar and pressing the left and right arrows so that you can pick the game up from where you left off. Alternatively, you could use this to cheat past a level that's causing you trouble. I made a big thing about editors towards the start of this series, but not many of the games we've looked at outside the first couple of years have actually had them. Indeed, Heartlight doesn't come with one either, however the readme included with the game points out that the levels are stored in a file with a self-explanatory plain text format, so in order to help the ratio of Epic games with editors, I spent an hour or so making one. Therefore, Heartlight has an editor called Heart Build, which was made by David Newton in 2018, 24 years after the game came out. You can download it from the author's site at tmouse.net. It's capable of reading the existing levels and letting you pull them around a little, or alternatively to build your own from scratch using any of the elements from the game. The save feature is admittedly fairly rudimentary, as you can't add your constructed levels to the game directly, instead having to copy the text string that the editor spits out and manually paste it into the levels file. I'd speculate that this is because the author decided this venture had gone far enough and wanted to spend more of his precious evening time finishing off a video while the toddler was asleep. The entire contents of the Epic Puzzle Pack were generously re-released in 2006 by Maciej Miosik under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license, after getting permission from the other parties involved in recompiling them from the original sources. This release was possibly inspired by the libertarian views that he now spouts on his blog, along with some rants against gender equality, renewable energy conspiracy theories and other assorted bollocks. These are the copies that I've been showing throughout the videos. They seem to be identical to the original registered Epic releases, except for a slight change to the copyright information. Therefore, the full versions of Robbo, Electro Man and Heartlight can be downloaded from pretty much wherever you can Google them. If you're running the SVN down version of DOSBox, you might need to set double scan to false in your configuration file to get Robbo and Heartlight to display correctly, because of the way that they use the VGA output. Don't ask me why, I don't know.